Thank you very much, Senator. Let me just say that old pictures just never die anymore. They just show up over and over and over again. And for me, in some respects, when I think back on my 7+ years in the corner office, I never get much past the fact that the big message the Lieutenant Governor and I got 20 days after we took office is that when it started to snow and snowed for 28 days, is big parts of our 7-8 years in office are just gonna suck. But it does remind me of a story about Senator Collins and Councilor Flaherty. They were talking about the snow. They were triple parked on Broadway. And Senator Collins was saying, you know, Counselor, when it really starts to snow, it gets really heavy. I get worried about driving these narrow streets here, and I'm concerned that I might crash, I might hurt somebody. And so Councilor Flaherty said, well, you know, the best thing to do when the snow gets really bad and you can't see where you're going is just get behind one of the plows and just follow the plow until you get sort of where you need to go, and then you can peel off from there. And he thought about that. Pretty interesting idea. And then a few days later, we had another one of those whiteout snowstorms, and Nick listened carefully to what he'd heard from his friend, the counselor, and the plow went by, and he hopped right behind it and followed it dutifully for about 20 minutes, and then the plow driver stopped the plow, and he gets out, and he walks back to Nick's car, and he looks at Nick. Nick puts down the window, and the guy looks at him and goes, "What are you doing?" And Nick said, well, I got this friend, a whiteout snowstorm. I was a little nervous about getting where I needed to go, so he told me just to get behind the plow and follow you wherever you went. And the guy goes, well, okay, now we finished the Walmart parking lot, and now we're going to go over and do this Stop and Shop parking lot. You know, I'm sorry that Congressman Lynch isn't here because, first of all, he's a great friend to the city and to the Commonwealth, and no one does more in his role on the Armed Services Committee for our men and women in uniform than he does. And no one should be surprised that he's in Poland. But it just won't be the same to have an event like this if somebody doesn't tell one of Congressman Lynch's jokes. Now, I can't begin to deliver it with the same affinity that he would, but I think it's important that we remember him through his wonderful sense of humor. Now, he tells a joke about Mary and Patrick, Dublin family. Patrick gets up in the afternoon because he works the night shift at the Guinness factory. Yeah, some of you know this one. And gives Mary a kiss on the cheek, and off he goes to work. And then around midnight, Mary gets a call, and it's the supervisor down at the factory. And he says, Mary, terrible accident. You got to get down here right away. Something's happened to Patrick. So Mary hot-foots it down to the factory, and she's really worried and nervous, and she gets in, and the supervisor says, Mary, I really don't know how to tell you this, but Patrick drowned in one of the vats. And she's like, oh my God, well, did he suffer? And the supervisor thinks about it for a minute, and he says, well, I don't think so, because he got out twice to go to the bathroom. That one was for Congressman Lynch. Now, Lieutenant Governor Polito and I are running for re-election. There will be a new governor and lieutenant governor here in Massachusetts. And I'm sure one of the things they'll do when they take office is they'll start flipping through the payroll. 40,000 people work for the executive branch, and they'll be looking for all kinds of names and stuff. And I just want to say right now to all the people who are running for governor and lieutenant governor, you're probably going to find a lot of Collinses in there. They're all qualified. They came by it honestly. There's nothing going on there. So just leave those ones alone. Is that okay, Senator? The Lynch ones, on the other hand, since he's not here. And I do just want to say one other thing, which is, over the course of the past 2 years, 2.5 years, we and everybody else has dealt with a global pandemic, and yeah, there were a lot of really difficult decisions that everybody had to make. People had to make them in their personal life, people had to make them in their professional life, businesses had to make them, government officials had to make them, everybody had to make them. And in many cases, they fell into what I call the category of least worst decision, or sometimes just plain lousy decisions. And the checks and balances and the stuff you had to weigh were enormously complicated and difficult. And throughout the early part of the pandemic, there was a phone call once a week, I think it was on Tuesday nights, between governors around the country. Phone calls at 8 o'clock, because that's 5 o'clock on the West Coast. And sometimes it would last for an hour, and sometimes it literally would last for 2 or 3 hours. And this is not a joke. And it was almost like therapy, because very few people could understand the situations and circumstances that many of us in elective office found ourselves in, other than somebody else who was in a similar kind of job. And more often than not, I would hang up the phone and I would walk into the kitchen or walk upstairs to the bedroom, and I would say to my wife, Lauren, you know, I'm really glad I'm the governor here in the Commonwealth of Mass, because a lot of the stories that people talked about in other parts of the country were really difficult, and they were mostly about the challenges of just trying to get people to be kind to each other during such a high anxiety and traumatic period of time. And if I had to say one thing about what I think we in elective office learned about you, the people of Massachusetts, is despite the brutality and the trauma and the disruption and the isolation and all the other stuff that came with this very challenging and at times tragic time, you folks were good to each other. And I've said many times that the best part of this job, by far, is the chance it gives you to get a front row seat to the way people in the Commonwealth deal with one another. The sense of community that exists here in Massachusetts, and especially in this community here in South Boston, is profoundly strong. It is a blessing to have an opportunity to see it up close and to benefit from it during the time the Lieutenant Governor and I have had to spend in public life. And I wish you all nothing but happiness, health, and no more COVID as we go forward. God bless.